akenani gutamani Iyaguma ejodani nangashe yale iposizo la migulo is where I say kenani oh sizo pumula is where igle segu yisi kashana nanje yewo siube ingoma kamo si weulusi veglo Jesu pagade sizo pumula ezwe eligle segu yishi kashana nanje yewo sigube ingoma kamo si yewulusi venglo Jesu pagade Teacher Zorora unyigayo uashoma Teacher Zorora nigeyo toimba Rio Ramosisi na Jesu Teacher Zogara Amen.
Loud cry. Vaganjila milyango ya Jerusalema Vasambamu uloa I can't hear you. Vaganjila milyango ya Jerusalema Vasambamu with loud cry. Vaganjila milyango ya Jerusalema Vasambamu uloa wawe Vaganjila milyango ya Jerusalema Vasambamu uloa. At least to go down in the books of history that loud cry featured Alinani. Amen. Amen.
Twagali banji mu mazuba gaindaya mujigombelo amulange mbaga
bachenga mu byabi bamwe bachogela
Twagali banji mu mazuba gaindaya mujigombelo amulange mbaga
bachenga mu byabi bamwe bachogela
bagati
muli buchete muli poli munganda ya baleza
bagagirwa
ukwalila munganda ya baleza bachogela
agati gabo
bagali bembezi bamwe bagali bamalu
abamwi
bagali bamataikona kunani babana ni wa
mawe
bagali bamaimbi kawa mutemba ulatenga
kabali wafangeli
babali bakamba usika baleta miu ya mujwa
mawe
bakabacheka mubyabi bakachogela koma
mawe tulalila
bakabacheka mubyabi bakabapirusha mu buzige
bagali banji mu mazuba gaindaya mujigombero amulange
bakabacheka mubyabi bamwe bachogela
bagali banji mu mazuba gaindaya mujigombero amulange
Bagabateka mubyabyo bamwibachogela Bagati tulibuchete muli bali munganda ya baleza Bagagirwa wawo munganda ya baleza wachogela Bagati gabo Bagali bambasi Bawi bagali bamalu Bagali bamatai kwana kunani kwa bandani kwa Bagali bamaibi kawa mutamba unacha Bagali bapangeli Bagali bakamausi kawa data miu ya mucho Bagabateka mujabi Bagachogela kwa
Mawe turarila
Bagabateka mujabi Wakabapirusha mubuzige Wakakala farao wakayeya ni wakazwa Israeli
Bakwela mangola kwina Bauma matina kwina Balala sivesu kwina
Bose wabatola Musa mulugula
Amurange chisije sumba
Tulachatala kamubachige wachogele mubuzige Tulachatala kamubachige wachogele mubuzige Tulachatala kamubachige wachogele mubuzige Wakakala farao wakayeya ni wakazwa Israeli
Bakwela mangola kwina Bauma matina kwina Balala sivesu kwina
Bose wabatola Musa mulugula
Amurange chisije sumba
Tulachatala kamubachige wachogele mubuzige Tulachatala kamubachige wachogele mubuzige Tulachatala kamubachige wachogele mubuzige
Kakatumba kasugo
musulera bojiba na Israeli
Nibagasiga musi hamenda
Halilo salala
Balange musule
Ipi ya falawa karadi ya bala Kubachinga kuchiba chogele mubuzige
Balange musule
Ipi ya falawa karadi ya bala Kubachinga kuchiba chogele mubuzige
Kakatumba
kasugo musulera bojiba na Israeli
Nibagasiga musi hamenda
Halilo salala
Balange musule
Ipi ya falawa karadi ya bala Kubachinga kuchiba chogele mubuzige
Balange musule
Ipi ya falawa karadi ya bala Kubachinga kuchiba chogele mubuzige Kupali malundu Yoya
Balange musule
Ipi ya falawa karadi ya bala Kubachinga kuchiba chogele mubuzige Kupali malundu Yoya
Balange musule
Ipi ya falawa karadi ya bala Kubachinga kuchiba chogele mubuzige
Balange musule
Ipi ya falawa karadi ya bala Kubachinga kuchiba chogele mubuzige
Leza
Tago ya kutuna mumanza farawa kule Noga tulaga muyotwa winda mubuzige Winda mukanda Wagabaji yove Mumala babo seba Israeli
Baga mulirila Musa bagati
Tulajitabuti Musa Kolanga ipi ya farawa ya bala
Baga mulirila wajisangane
Tulajitabuti Musa Kolanga ipi ya farawa ya bala
Baga mulirila wabuzwagule
Tulajitabuti Musa Kolanga ipi ya farawa ya bala
Baga mulirila wabuzanyira
Tulajitabuti Musa Kolanga ipi ya farawa ya bala
Leza
Tago ya kutuna mumanza farawa kule Noga tulaga muyotwa winda mumuzi Winda mukanda Wagabaji yove Mumala babo seba Israeli
Baga mulirila Musa bagati
Tulajitabuti Musa Kolanga ipi ya farawa ya bala
Baga mulirila wajisangane
Tulajitabuti Musa Kolanga ipi ya farawa ya bala
Baga mulirila wabuzwagule
Tulajitabuti Musa Kolanga ipi ya farawa ya bala
Baga mulirila wabuzanyira
Tulajitabuti Musa Kolanga ipi ya farawa ya bala Amuchemuke musule mubone kasuka satani mwabo Kuchinga wana waleza bagabusia kutima chokele mumuzi Wakamukamanisha Satani, wakamukamanisha Satani, amuchebuke musule mubone kasuka Satani mwabona kuchinga bana waleza bakamusia kuti batogele bakadwe bubuko bakawiye wakamukamanisha Satani kuwachosha bana waliye wakamukamanisha Satani chayanda diaboli mama kuwachosha bana waliza 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 wakamukamanisha Satani wakajite chayanda.
Good afternoon, Streamview. Good afternoon, Streamview. The sporadic seating arrangement is interesting. One thing that we like to do as people that deal with emotions is to get involuntary feedback when we read the room. So it will be twice as challenging here, but this will be my sample size. So make sure you represent them well. Okay. My name is James Banda. James Kafuila Banda. Others say Kafuila James Banda. Either is fine. I work as a doctor in the field of mental health, training as a psychiatrist, soon to reach its end. I am the one of whom it was spoken that I met with a different path on my way here this morning. But I am glad to have gotten here in one piece and to be given this privilege to speak yet again. The last 2 weeks have been very busy with camp meetings and sharing the little that I know. And I was saying this morning to my wife, statistically, when you are on the road this frequently, the probability of meeting with a mishap is high. So you can imagine how it was when I was telling her that what I said in the morning has happened. And you're recording? Yeah. Okay, now I will not say this next part. But yes, you know, there are certain things where you want to tell people, then there's one person you're scared to tell. And that one was my wife. Now, how do I say? But we praise the Lord that we're here. And if you hear me referring to my experience as I try to explain some of the concepts, please bear with me. I am not being narcissistic. I am just trying to inflect or reflect on what I experienced and try to give a practical aspect to some of the things I will be saying. Are we together? Okay. So I will start here. I don't have a PowerPoint for those who like PowerPoints. And the reason is simple, that with these presentations, you can't predict where to go. Depending on how and what we find as the hotspots of discussion, we will move there. But basically, I will suffice to say that this is the outline. I will attempt to make an argument in the first 15 minutes for why I believe that having a rooted faith in Christ is important for our mental health. Are we together? And when I'm done making a concept around that, I will introduce my editorialized version of the definition of mental health according to WHO. And from that, I will again remind us why I believe being rooted in Christ is important for our mental health. Then we'll move on and discuss mental illnesses and how they come, or the factors that influence whether or not we develop a mental illness. And because of what we will say about what a mental illness is, we will then move on to look at some of the criteria, which we call in our sector criteria, which you can use to identify whether or not you have a mental illness or have had a mental illness or have had experiences that result in things that require attention. I know most of us don't like to associate ourselves with having a mental illness, but the reality is, whether we like it or not, the chances are high that on this side of heaven, we will deal with things that border on mental health. Why do I think it's important for us to discuss this in a church setting? Because it is difficult sometimes to delineate between what seems to be spiritual and what is mental health issue. There are places where it's very gray and very difficult to explain, and sometimes we tend to lean towards what seems more favorable to us. It's less stigmatized to say, no, I'm just having a spiritual difficulty. Sometimes we may have or be dealing with mental health issues for which God has provided ways out, and we still expect him to perform miracles for us. So knowing this information, I hope, will bring us to a place, one, where we are able to identify when we need mental health care or support ourselves, and are able to get ourselves to make the courageous step to look for that help and receive it. Number two, and also quite important, is to be able to identify in those within our society, so that at least, maybe peradventure, we can reduce the chances of people being surprised when other people, for instance, kill themselves or die by suicide, so to speak. It is common that people are wondering, no, he was okay, everything was fine, we don't know what happened, only to hear that he hung himself. Partly it is because we do not know what we're looking for, and we do not pay attention to the people in our immediate environment to be able to support them through some of the things that they go through. And thirdly and lastly, I hope that we can reduce the stigma around mental illnesses, so that those who do experience them do not feel the need to steal away, even from their church communities, do not feel the need to run away or hide, but can be accepted and fellowshipped with in spite and despite of the situation that they have. I hope that makes sense. And so the first 15 minutes here now starts. Being rooted in a rootless age, as a theme, I think for me struck a chord, because first of all, we need to agree that the age we live in is rootless for us to accept the theme. Not so? Yes. And I know people are a bit fast, so I may not wait for the responses. As long as the sample size here provides a response, we will move. And being rooted is one of the things that I think most of the preachers will emphasize on in terms of rooting or being rooted in Christ. For me, I will start by saying this. Here in this camp meeting at Streamview, we are living on the assumption that each of us is rooting or are rooted in Christ. Not so. Or at least in the values of Christendom, Christianity, so to speak. However, I argue that even with that assumption, it does not hold true for many of us. I don't know where the proportions are. It could be 50-50. It could be most of us. But let me start with addressing that. Do we have any youth in here? We have a few. One of the issues we find with the youth that lead or tends to make them at higher risk of some of the disorders is the way that they navigate their exploration of the world. When you are looking for that value system by which you will live, those of us who are Adventist parents have a rejection or a bias towards identifying as Christian. But in the life, in the reality of life, on the ground, it might not be the case. And one of the problems is that faith and Christianity don't seem to assure the outcomes of life that we are looking for. When we look at the issues of faith and we look at what's there, people are talking about martyrs and, dying in faith and glorying in God, even in troubles and tribulations. It doesn't seem to lead us to the place where we want to go. We want to be millionaires. We want to be the creme de la creme. And the issues of faith don't seem to promise us to get there. Newsflash, they don't. Because the matters of faith are not just about the life here, they are also, and more importantly, about the life to come. So if we are one of those where Ndarama will just spoil our situation for eternity, we may not get to the point where we have so much excess and are classified among the billionaires. And for some of us, this is a deterrent in abiding or living by this principle. So it's easier to think, okay, let me become capitalist. Follow the people who are making it and abide by those values. In other words, let me root myself in my career. Let me root myself in whatever it is that we are considering, because this faith thing doesn't seem to promise me what I'm looking for. But here I will say this. Being rooted is a choice we have to make, but the choice will not wait forever. If you delay in deciding where to root yourself, life will root you. Let's get into it. Anything that you choose to expose yourself to now, adult or child, it leaves an imprint on your mind. We call it a neural pathway. It's like a road. When we came to the camp, there are certain paths which were not very clear. The more people have walked on them, the more clearer it is that this is a Nikanjiraka. Even when I'm lost, I know that most people have passed where? Here. And there's a likelihood that at the end of this Kama path, I will find there's somewhere where people were going, whether it's the ablution or the chapel. It is easy to identify. So it is with the mind. The more you expose yourself to something, good or bad, it leaves a pathway on your mind. And it becomes easier for you to walk that path. What may start as an experimentation phase, before I choose to root myself in Christ, let me explore, see the world, may end up being the place where the roots attach. Are we together? So being rooted, we need to be deliberate about it, because there is a point beyond which transplanting a tree is close to impossible. Not only for trees, so it is for us as human beings. There will be a point beyond which moving yourself from where these things have led you will be very difficult. Not impossible, because the blood is sufficient and His grace is sufficient, but it will be difficult. Because not only do we need the glorification or the justification which God gives us, we need to walk sanctification, which means that we need to start working against those neural pathways that we have created. So we need to be deliberate about it. With this brief introduction, I argue that we need to have Christ in us. We need to root ourselves in Christ, and this will be good for our mental health. And as I finish the second part, of our discussion, I'll explain this a little more in detail. So what then is mental health? I wish I could ask questions. Can I? Will people answer? It's very hard when you ask a question and people are just watching you. It sparks emotions and becomes a bit difficult. What do we think mental health is? What is our understanding of mental health? And there's no pun intended, and I know I'm speaking to Chainama Church, so I expect answers. Because we are neighbors. Where I work and where you are, we are just neighbors. So please, neighbors, let's help each other. What is mental health? A state of well-being of the mind. Very good, thank you. Anyone else? Is there a mic that can move? Okay, that's okay. Anyone else, you might have to come or shout very loud. It's difficult to see the hands. Okay. A state of well-being. There's many places where I go and ask, what is mental health? people say Chainama case. And I don't know what they mean by that, but I suspect it has to do with the fact that Chainama is a mental institution. And most think that mental health is the same as mental illness. It is not. According to the WHO, mental health is a state of well-being, in which an individual is able to do these 4 things. Number 1, they should be able to deal with their daily stresses. They should be able to do what? How many of us today, seated here, do not have any stress at all? They are pointing at a baby here. You don't know. Even her, she may have stress. It's just difficult in communicating it. Stress is a universal currency of life as it is now. All of us are comfortably seated on a chair. We are providing it with what? Stress. For it to hold your weight up, it must undergo that stress. So even the inanimate is exposed to stress. From our end, what do I define stress as? Simply put, it is the difference between what we want and what it is. When there's a difference between what you want and what the reality is, it has the potential to cause you stress altogether. When you want to have a child and you don't have a child, it causes you stress. When you want to be married and you don't have a wife, you are not married, it causes you stress. There are many other definitions of it, but for me, this is the simplest I've found, and I think it's functional enough for us to move on. Another author says that suffering is having what you don't want and wanting what you don't have. When you have what you don't want, whatever, like for instance, now I have a damaged car. I don't want a damaged car. Are we together? That experience, according to that author, is suffering. Or at the very least can cause us stress. Are we together? In good mental health, we must be able to deal with our daily stresses. When something goes the way we did not plan for it, be able to deal with it. Not that it will not stress you, but that you have the capacity to deal with it. So then it suffices to say that if that's the definition or that's a feature of having good mental health, when one is failing to deal with their daily stresses, it means that if someone with good mental health must be able to deal with their daily stresses, and then someone is failing to deal with daily stresses, what does it mean when they fail? It means that they are not in good mental well-being at that moment. Are we together? There are many things that cause us stress in life. Some of them are things outside our control, things we could have done nothing about. For instance, all children would love to grow up with both parents. True or false? True. So when a child is growing up with one parent, it can cause them stress. Did they have a choice? No. The circumstances around that did not even ask permission in whatever circumstance. Sometimes a parent will just decide, you are not my child, I'm off. And the single mother remains to fend for this child, deprived of their parental figure in their father. And this child must experience and deal with this stress. Many times they don't even have the mechanisms or the ways of dealing with it adequately. And it can result in mental illnesses, which can then result in issues with dealing with other stresses altogether. Sometimes the parent dies. Sometimes the parents divorce. And studies have shown that it is easier on the child if the parent dies than if parents divorce. Sidestep. Those of us considering marriage, it is not a simple decision. The effects of it will outlive you and even your marriage when you leave it, if you do. Understand and make haste slowly, says the writer E.G. White. Not so. Make haste, because the day you decide, no, it's toxic, I'm leaving. For that child with whom you did not even sit to discuss and agree on whether to leave or to stay, the effects will continue, and for them it is worse than even parental death. Stresses. Work stresses. Family stress. There's stress everywhere. And one of the things that stress does to us, whatever stress that you're undergoing, it has a tendency to make us act away from our values. When you are undergoing a particular stress, something goes wrong at the office and it is stressing you, the first thing you want to do is, how can I get rid of this bad feeling that I have? And that, trying to get rid of that bad feeling, puts people at risk of acting away from their values. Some people, in trying to sort out financial stress, have thought of theft as a solution, even when they wouldn't otherwise steal. Under a moment of stress, I think I can just get this, and maybe when I get it back, I'll put it back. And before you realize, someone finds out that the money is not there, and it creates more stress. Other people, under the stress of marital problems, have slept with people they had no business sleeping with. Under stress. So they chose to act away from their values without recognizing that this is what we call a maladaptive coping mechanism, a bad way to cope with what's going on. Stress left to try and feel better. In the moment, I end up doing something away from my values. I spend money which wasn't supposed to be spent. I say something which is not true. Youths, in trying to prove their rebelliousness, have ended up volunteering themselves as pregnant women or fathers to children at an early age because of not being able to deal with some of the things that come to them. But the problem is, in our minds, we think, okay, when I do this, I will feel better. I will be revenge. I will be getting back at this person. And yet, acting away from your values leads to even more stress. So I argue that we need to be rooted in Christ, because the stressful moments will come. Some small, some big. And the only way, one of the most sure ways of staying put in your value systems, is to rely on the power of Christ. To avoid secondary problems. To avoid creating our own issues after that. Because it is easier to deal with problems where you had no choice. You will be kinder to yourself. But a problem that comes because of your own volition, what you chose to do, many people fail to render forgiveness to themselves. To a point that even when God says, come, let us reason together, it sounds like something that's not feasible for them. Because they cannot see. Look, the pastor at lunch was saying, at 11 hours, was saying, between us and God, these two, you and God, you know everything wrong about yourself. To a point where, even when people publicly give you respect, inside yourself, you cannot accept it. Because self-hatred takes place. Many people assume that when God says, love others as you love yourself, that loving yourself is automatic. It is not. There are people who do not even know how to love themselves. And so, in the name of love, they act outside their best interest and end up injuring themselves, thinking they are showing themselves love. I will just do what I want. Is doing what you want in your best interest? Most times, maybe not. But we still go ahead in the name of loving ourselves, because even that, the concept of loving ourselves is foreign to the sinful mind. So we need Christ to help us deal with our daily stresses. I say this usually. Let us make a habit of living, L-I-V-I-N-G, the way we believe. whatever it is that you believe in, live that way. We get unnecessary pressure from people whose belief systems we might not even know, and assume that we can do whatever it is they do because the end justifies the means. Your experience of the same thing will be totally different because of what you believe. It is not enough also just to believe in Christ. It is important to know the Christ you believe in. What are the features of this Christ? Because a belief in a wrong Christ will result in a totally different experience. If the Christ you believe in is one of vengeance and hate, your experience in Christianity will be different from he who believes in a Christ of love. So live the way you believe, dealing with daily stress. Number 2 is that you must be able not only to realize your potential, but you must be able to live up to that potential. E.G. White writes that many of us have ended up being average at what we do because we chose something more pleasing. We chose something that seemed to render us more honor, as opposed to following where we might be of the best good. Mind, Character, and Personality, I think it's page 341, if I'm not mistaken, volume 1. And she says, others would have been very excellent farmers, but they ended up as average physicians. Because the place where they were supposed to achieve their most potential did not seem as honorable, did not seem as pleasing to them. Some of us here are average in the work that we do because we have failed to realize and achieve our potential and ended up in the wrong place. That's one. But some of us, even in the right place, we fail to achieve our potential. We are not aware of how much we can actually achieve in our lifetime. And so we will die average. We will die maybe even poor for failure to realize and achieve our potential. And anyone who fails to realize and achieve their potential, what WHO is saying is that look out, there might be an issue with their mental health. Because those with good mental health are able not only to realize but also to achieve. What does it mean? It means that if I work, I'm a service delivery person, they call us essential workers. If in a day I can see 50 patients and I only see 10, I have not lived up to my potential. Even though I've done my best with those 10, it is not good enough. If you are able to get 100% on a test and you get 95, it is not good enough. Because in good mental health, we realize and are able to attain or achieve our potential. We do not settle for less. And who do we know calls us to a life of excellence? Who better than Jesus, our Creator, to help us realize exactly what we can do? Not only what we can do, but to help us realize what we should do versus what we shouldn't do to achieve or attain our highest potential. So I continue to argue that being rooted in Christ is good for your mental health because God is able to help you realize and achieve your potential. Settling for less money, there is no glory in it. Some of us have reached a point of even looking down or sidelining people who have attained their best. We even give names. And society will give names as though there is something to be ashamed of when you do your best. There is nothing. In fact, quite the opposite. When we fail to achieve that which God has placed us here for, E.G. White says, there is no one created with such a specific purpose as yours in the whole wide world, which means if you fail to achieve your potential, God must find a plan B for what you are supposed to do. It has eternal consequences. Having good mental health enables us to not only realize but achieve our potential. People will applaud you for being good in your current role. But if you are able to do that and still serve at church and still be a good dad and still do, and you neglect the others, glorifying yourself because you are good at your career, it is not good enough. But then we'll double back and say, trying to be good at all of these things is what results in stress. Not so. I need to be a father, I need to be a husband, I need to be a doctor, I need to be a friend, and it can result in stress. The point of life is not to run away from stress. Are we together? It is not an objective in life that we should not experience stress. The objective is to achieve goals. And when stress comes, in good mental health, we should be able to deal with it. Are we together? If it means adjusting the timeline to enable us to achieve the potential, do that. But do not neglect to achieve. Number 3, you must be able to work productively. If you notice in this first part, I'll talk a lot about what E.G. White has read or has written, because sometimes we require a scientific validation for things that God has already provided. Work productively. If you are at work and no work is done, there is something wrong with your mental health. No questions about it. If you've been in the garden, you've seen those pictures where the wife tells the husband, we need to talk, and he's watering in the rain. Work done is equal to something wrong with he has failed to deal with the stress of the wife. So in good mental health, we must be able to work and learn productively. Where our hand moves, products must follow. Does that mean that those with good mental health do not fail? No. It means that when the objective has not yet been met, it might result in stress. I started out to achieve A. I have failed. It is a stress. I deal with it. I get back to being productive in my work. Are we together? In good what? Mental health. People who easily, and I say this again, people who easily give up on achieving the goals of whatever it is they are doing may have an issue with their mental health. Remember, I'm saying issue, not having an illness sign. Because there's a difference. They may have an issue with their mental health. In good mental health, you must be able to work productively. And finally, in good mental health, you must be able to contribute positively to your community. You cannot exist in a community and not influence it or impact it for the good and claim to be in good mental health. Some of us are too heavenly minded. Everything is about heaven. Our heads are already in heaven. That the issues around us, we cannot see. If we do see, we would rather ignore. To a point where our community cannot even count us among problem solvers, solutions to the problems in our community. Just a stuck drainage at your own yard, at the gate, water is overflowing. Boma yanganepo, yanganepo vichan. You must be able to contribute positively in your society. At this time, we have a very bad economic situation. How are you contributing positively? Are you counting yourself among those who are just lifting their hands and wailing? Or are you doing your best in your role to help lift your end of the economy so that tomorrow, in a concerted effort, we are able to improve things for ourselves? Some of us are overly dependent on other people. If anything good must come, even to ourselves, someone must stand up to do it for us. We must have a disposition in our minds such that we are asking the question, how can I show up today to make this place better than it was yesterday? How can I contribute to making this place better? You come to camp meetings, certain things are still being developed, things that are not okay. The question, instead of just problem identifiers, ask yourself, how can I be part of the solution as an evidence of having good mental health? And who better than Christ to make us our most productive, to make us contribute positively in our societies today. So I argue again that we need Christ for us to have these tenets of good mental health. Does that make sense? Does it mean that when we have faith, we will not need to do anything else? No. We need Christ in addition to everything else we do, because faith without works is dead. So just believing, no, I believe in God, so I'll be able to, no. Put in the work. If it requires you to study, do that. And the more that we put ourselves in this mindset of being able to achieve these four things, it creates neural pathways. It becomes easier for us to be able to think, how can I deal with this stress? As opposed to buckling under the stress of it and giving up and throwing in the towel. Even the hardest things, which we may not have eminent solutions to, we will say, in a very feasible, realistic timeline, I will sort it out. But what can I do today to deal with this particular stress? Are we together? Are we together? Are people awake? Do I call for an interactive process? Let us stand up. Let us stand to our feet. I know listening to me can be a bit boring, and it's quite hot, and people are full because the kitchen did their part. So let's, the instrumentalists are not here, but let's try. We do head and shoulders, so that we just stretch a little bit. Head and shoulders, knees and toes, knees and toes. Head and shoulders, knees and toes, and. Head and shoulders, knees and toes. If I don't see you doing the actions, I'll bring you here. It might cause you stress, but we'll see if you're able to deal with it. We'll assess your mental health. Let's do it one more time. Head and shoulders, knees and toes. Head and shoulders, knees and head and shoulders, knees and toes. Okay, let's have our seats. Are there any questions or points of clarification on how mental health has been defined? There's a question? If you're in the back and you have a question, please just raise your hand. I can walk to you. There's no problem. Or someone will walk to you. Yes, please, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask the second thing that you said for what shows good mental health. I think I must have missed one. I heard the first one.
Dealing with daily stresses?
Yes, dealing with daily stresses. Should be able to work productively and then productively able to contribute positively to your community. What was the other one?
The second one was to be able to realize and attain or achieve your potential.
Attain and achieve.
Yes, realize and achieve your potential. So if you are built to achieve 100, work towards achieving 100. Realize, first of all, know in your mind that I'm able to do it, and then do it. Are we together? So let's move on then and discuss in the next 30 minutes what is a mental illness and what are the factors that lead to mental illness. Mental health and mental illness exist on what we call a spectrum. It's like the same road. On one end, good mental health. On the other end, a mental illness. And in between is where life happens. Stresses happen, we experience the same emotions that if they become so deranged, will lead us into a mental illness. So when, for instance, we lose a loved one, we feel sad, we start to grieve, not so. Is all sadness depression? No. But that sadness, if mismanaged or poorly handled, if we don't know how to cope with it, we fail to deal with that particular situation efficiently, we may end up in a state of depression. Are we together? So it exists on a continuum. If like this morning, I woke up with an okeka. Now, I can't even drive it. So tomorrow and the rest of the weeks until it's fixed, I'll be dealing with stresses. So my mental situation, even at this point, might not be as optimum as when I woke up. Because something has changed. Life has happened. And so I'm somewhere on the spectrum. And if I fail to handle the situation well, this accident can result in depressed. Are we together? Because I can walk the whole road of the spectrum and end up in a place where I meet the criteria of depression. If not depression, it could even be an anxiety disorder. When something happens to us, we tend to feel anxious, not so. Like before I stood up, I always feel anxious before I speak. And depending on how we deal with the triggers that make us anxious, we may be able to recover to good mental health or proceed into a mental illness, in which we will call anxiety disorders. And many things exist under that. So the continuum is vinagwira na chabe, which means that anyone with mental health is at risk of developing a mental illness. So be careful the next time you ask people from China, because you might just be one incident away from mental illness. It can happen to any and everyone. So that's the continuum. And in the next session, I will discuss, before I move to that, let me ask, what do we think causes people to have mental illnesses? Why is it that the same incident that I had today, I don't look depressed right now, do I? I hope I don't. I don't feel very depressed. It may hit me a bit later as I continue to recover from the shock of it. But what makes others more at risk of developing a mental illness than others? I'll give this example. Some of us here, even adults, when we were youth, we tried alcohol. Not so. They're scared to answer. The ones who have answered are the ones who didn't try. Some of us did. And of the same alcohol which we tested, some of our friends became alcoholics while we were able to come out of it. Or maybe it was the other way. Our friends were able to come out of it while we became alcoholics. Same incidents. Two siblings both lose a parent. One ends up with a mental disorder, the other one seems to be coping well. By the way, when it comes to parents, we don't even compare it one-to-one. Because the theory is that no two children experience the parents exactly the same way. The experience of each child with the same parent is totally different. So even the response to that parent's loss is different. The same way the old African saying says, you can't step into the same river how many times? Twice. Because when you step the first time, that water has moved. The time you step the second time, it's a different set of waters. The firstborn found the mother at a certain skill level. Novice. The lastborn found the expert mom. So the experience is different. The firstborn finds dad who has poor emotional regulation. Maybe. The lastborn might find a worse dad or a better dad, depending on what has happened in between. But the point is, two different people experiencing the same event may have totally different reaction. One more at risk of developing an illness and the other one not as much. What are the factors that influence these outcomes? Number one, biological reasons. Can I move a bit from here? I will not cause that. Okay, let's explore. Not very far? Oh, okay. Yeah, no, it's okay then. Let me, no. These things have rules. We will be here. Biological reasons. In our families, we are well aware. I know these families, they have diabetes. My mother had diabetes, asthma, and we are not ashamed to say these things. Even if you're dating, it's easy to say, no, in my family, there's asthma, there's BP, there's sugar, and so on and so forth. Did we know, or do we know, that the same way that diabetes can be passed down, even the risk of developing mental illnesses can be passed down? Whatever mental illnesses that we'll discuss today and the others we might not be able to touch, psychotic disorders, anxiety disorders, mood disorders, eating disorders, sleeping disorders, neurocognitive disorders, and so on and so forth, can be passed down. That's why if you had a grandmother who developed Alzheimer's dementia or vascular dementia or any form of dementia, you are at risk of developing it. If you have a father or an uncle or a grandpa who has a tendency towards alcoholism, for you, that one sip might be the difference between developing alcohol use disorder, which we used to call alcohol addiction, and not developing it. Whereas for your friend, it might be an experiment, you might inadvertently end up being forcibly rooted in the habit of alcohol. Because biological factors are important. We can pass on genes to posterity that will put them at higher risk of developing mental illnesses than if we didn't. What does this mean? To tie it together with another theme we call epigenetics, which basically talks about how the environmental factors around us can influence which genes we express. So when we inherit genes, there's some randomization that happens, and then they decide, okay, this kama egg and this kama guy will meet together and form you. In that set of genes that you receive, it is not everything that is expressed. Are we together? Some of the genes lie dormant until certain factors make it efficient for it to be expressed. But when we expose ourselves, for instance, you're an elder who secretly takes a kama whiskey at the office and maybe a little bit at night, and you might be able to survive without being known as being alcoholic. But in your being alcoholic, you have taught your body to say, oh, this is something we're exposed to, so we need to produce the chemicals in our body that help us to deal with this substance when it comes in. And those protein structures that make the process more efficient, which we call the epigenetic cascade of proteins, can be passed down to those that come after you. Such that, Nemi Ambidefie, they already are producing those same proteins, which put them at high risk of, once they get exposed, becoming or developing a disorder around that thing. Not just alcohol, but all addictive behaviors. In fact, not just addictive, but all behaviors. If your behavior is a tendency to a certain direction, you're creating an environmental system which makes it easier for those coming after you to develop the same tendencies. Personality disorders can be passed down. Narcissistic tendencies from cluster B can be passed down. Overdependency, eccentric behaviors, all of those things as personality disorders can be passed down. So biological factors play a role. Sometimes we suffer ourselves, blaming ourselves for things that we received in our genes. But we praise God for His grace, not so? Because through His grace, we're able to overcome. And sometimes we need even assistance from professionals to achieve that victory. The second thing are environmental factors. I touched about them a bit when I talked about epigenetics. Things in our environment, such as the food that we eat. You see, we have taken certain things so lightly, we've argued them out among ourselves to a point of fatigue, such that the importance of such things as our health message starts to dwindle in terms of how important it is. We feel that it is because someone argued, no, it is not salvific, we just need the blood of Christ. The reality is this, brothers and sisters, fathers and mothers, grandmothers and grandfathers. The things that we expose ourselves to, including food, including entertainment, including all of these things, will have an impact on whether or not we develop mental disorders. Just nutrition. In fact, there's a whole department now that's studying on what they call nutritional psychiatry and lifestyle psychiatry to try and enable people to be in preventive mode for some of these things, because careless exposure to some of these environmental factors can lead or increase the chances of us developing mental disorders. Are we together? There are certain foods that when eaten will make you feel a certain way, like your anxiety levels may be heightened, or your risk of being in a depressed mood will be heightened. And if it prolongs, you end up meeting the criteria of a diagnostic of a disorder, and you end up being diagnosed as having that condition. Environmental factors. But there are certain things that we are exposed to in our environments that are not particularly our choice. One of the major things, and the only thing maybe I'll talk about for today, is adverse childhood events and associated traumas. There's a whole category of disorders called stress and trauma-related disorders. We'll get into that hopefully if there's time. But the point is, some of us have been exposed to such traumas from early childhood, sometimes even in adulthood, that have not been resolved. Stemming from emotional trauma, physical abuse, sexual abuse, and so on and so forth. In my practice, I have found, anecdotally, it's not research or scientifically proven, but anecdotally, I estimate that between 60 and 75% of women or females have had some form of abuse, whether it was attempted, threatened, or successful, probably penetrative sexual abuse. And the culture has been that when you experience such a thing, you tell, usually it's maybe the mother or a grandmother, and two responses are common. Number one, it's not true, you are lying. And number two, keep it to yourself, or don't talk about it because it will bring embarrassment. And many people have grown into adulthood with the negative effects of these traumas. Some of us grew up in households where it became normal to be beaten indiscriminately. Even when you don't understand the reasons, you know that it's just a matter of time. Lunchtime hasn't come. By the time I'm sleeping, I will be beaten. And sometimes these abuses come from people who don't know any better, because they themselves have reached adulthood having not resolved some of their own traumas. So they don't know much better. Some have lost spouses and failed to deal with that grief to a point where the children suffer a lot of hardship on account of the pain of that spouse who remains alive. And it's difficult to resolve some of these things. I was at a place somewhere where, a person was saying, I'm very bitter. I don't know how to get rid of this bitterness. And I realize as you are talking that even this bitterness is what I now extend to my child. Because I beat that child as a way of making myself feel better, to a point where that child now doesn't even talk to that parent anymore. Some of us were the child, and some of us are the parent on different accounts. We're talking about environmental things that we've been exposed to. There are people who had to mature before their years because of circumstances, taking on responsibility which otherwise they should not have. Being responsible for other human beings as a child, adverse childhood events. And these things need to be resolved. Because as you go on with unresolved traumas, they have other ways of raising their heads. Are we together? There are people who have opted not to marry because of sexual abuse events that happened prior. The idea of even submitting to the vulnerability of intimacy is so stressful, so painful, that they would rather live a life without it. Others have ended up marrying to meet the social criteria of being or doing well. But in those homes, it is a struggle to just go to bed at night because it may happen again. And in the mind of this young lady, in the mind of this young man, afraid to even share what they have experienced, they suffer through it. A place where everyone says you must have pleasure. No, you will bond. No, it is very essential for you. But for you, it is like going through that pain again. And people might not understand. No, this one is just difficult. I don't know. I can't understand. And you even feel, no, maybe I just go outside without realizing that my friend might be dealing with an issue. Social factors, where and how we grew up, have an impact on whether or not we develop these disorders. If you grew up in a place that is socially supportive, you see, it is not just about growing up around people. The quality of interactions with the people that you grow up with matters. For those of us who have dependencies in our home, I know it is hard. Sometimes it may feel as though, I provide A, B, C, D, I do A, B, C, D. In addition to that, you see, provision is not an easy thing. Paul says, when he was boasting, he says, I have spent and myself been spent working for you people. And that is the calling of provision. It is not just providing external things, because part of the essential commodities for bringing up individuals, children, is to provide yourself. Be there. Provide your time, your attention. Are we together? A differential dispensation of this attention, children know. They can tell. That is why people like me were the guys who all our cousins would send, go and ask. Because somehow they saw a pattern. If this one asks, it increases the chance. If that one asks, it will not go through. We need to realize that the social space in which we have been, in which we grow, in which we currently live, has an impact on whether or not. Let me give you an example. This morning I had an accident. Depending on what the social situation will be when I get home, between supportive, rejected, shamed, it will have an impact on how I cope with this event. Such that if it is supportive, my chances of recovering to good mental health, despite the bad circumstances, are higher. If I meet with a more negative disposition, the risk of me internalizing and ending up at a place of mental illness becomes higher. Our social environment matters. Number 4, the schools still argue between this one, but there's a spiritual aspect. So the model of health as it exists now is a biopsychosocial, and this is what we've just described. But there's an argument for a biopsychosocial spiritual model of health. And there are papers that have been done for those who like to read, where they're arguing, are we really ready for a spiritual aspect to be incorporated into health? Because first of all, it's very difficult to measure. So all of the other things come with it. But because we are in a space where we are believers, I will bring this up and say, depending on how healthy your spiritual life is, it will influence how you adjust and adapt to situations, and can very well influence or contribute to your development of a mental illness or not. Are we together? In the beginning, I said, it is not enough that you believe. What you believe also matters. If you believe in a God who is just out to get you, even your interactions with this God will be rigged by things like anxiety, fear. And you're at risk of developing a disorder when you deal with a stress that triggers the same emotion as where your solution must be, where your support system must be. You have a bad thing that happens, whatever it is, that an event. Your spouse or your social system makes you more anxious. Your God makes you more anxious. And your past already puts you at risk of anxiety. The chances are high that you end up with an anxiety disorder, triggered by something that others might think is trivial. Are we together? So these are the factors at play. And why do we bring these things? Because in our Christian lives, lifestyle is how we measure each other, not so? In the church, when you say that brother is in good and regular standing, did you measure his spirituality? No. What did you measure? Tithe and offering. What else? Attendance. Coming early. So it is basically tenets of behavior. We just measure behavior and say, I think this is good and regular. Did you know that most of us have learned how to fit the bill? We know how to act to be able to reach good and regular standing even when we are not. We know how to do that. That's not so. That is why they say we are a generation of depressed people with happy faces. Because we know how to show up. If someone just walked in here today, they wouldn't realize the kind of things we go through, the kind of things we deal with. So it is just these behavioral things that we measure. And we bring these discussions on what influences some of the things that we see, so that we understand that for some of the brothers, it's not just censure that they need. Before you rush to voting each other's names out, let us find out how can we help. Because some of those behavioral traits which you guys say, no, Uja is very promiscuous, just sleeps around, may be the only evidence of mental issues that they're dealing with. There are people who fail to recognize and realize their value to an extent that they feel so valueless in their being, their body might as well work as an entrepreneur or gadget to at least bring me money, if it's not good for anything else. Because that act of feeling degraded by abuse of whatever form takes a lot to recover from, and many do not. So what you might see as just utter sinfulness might be an expression, a loud cry for help on account of either biological, psychological, social factors. And we as the spiritual family, the social system, end up what? Kicking them to the curb as well. In theory, we say, no, we just write you out of the book, but in the church, you're still there. But on the ground, we see how we treat people who have been disfellowshipped. It is different. So we need to be able to understand these things. In the next few minutes, no, I don't have few minutes. Maybe 10 or so. 15 minutes, then we take questions. In the next 15 minutes, I will discuss a few disorders and just lay out what the criteria looks like for people to recognize when they or people around them are at risk or seem to be developing these disorders. I'll start with mood disorders because the emotions are things that announce themselves very early in any experience. The first thing that raises its head, emotions. Such that, maybe before I get into that, we have a generation of people, old and young, who have made a habit of acting on their emotions, feelings alone, straight into behavior. Because I feel this way, I must do ABC. Why did you do that? Because I felt that way. Is it really enough to just feel? I feel like drinking water. Regardless of who the water belongs to, I should drink. No. As mental health people, we encourage, we educate, we help people to have a habit of passing the feelings through the thoughts, so that from the thoughts, the behaviors can be directed and the feelings adjusted. And this is what we call emotional intelligence. Recognizing my state of emotional well-being, recognizing your state of emotional well-being, realizing that they may be the same or different, and then regulating that state of emotional well-being, which means that it is not enough that I just feel like running away. I committed to doing a presentation. I must find a way of dealing with the stress to deliver that which I committed to. Are we together? So I run my feelings through my thoughts, brush them against my value systems, so that from there, when I regulate and decide how I will now move, it is coming from a point that represents me. Remember, we talked about people acting away from their values. And one of the reasons is this, that we act on our feelings. Because I feel afraid to just say that this went this way and we have lost the money, I end up lying. To cover that lie, I must lie again. Co-opt other people. And now the stress of all of these things that have happened come to a critical point where I have no choice. But no one around me actually knows exactly what I'm going through because I acted away from my values and created an alternative world which other people are not aware of. So when we end at a point where we feel hopeless, people don't even know that you've walked a totally different road from what you explained. Why? Because at a certain point, we did not stop to say, what is my value system and what would direct my action? So we'll start with mood disorders. The first one we'll discuss, maybe the only one, considering time, is depression. Depression, the key thing that you will see is the first thing that we will see is the low mood. And this low mood exists almost every day, almost all day long, for at least 2 weeks. That is the criteria that was set. And the reason why we have this criteria is so that not everyone who feels low is diagnosed as being depressed. Otherwise, at every point, everyone will be unnecessarily being diagnosed with depression. But low mood for at least 2 weeks, almost the whole day, almost every day, for 2 weeks or more. Number 2, changes in appetite. Changes in what? The way the sample population is doing very well. I hope it is representative. The appetite is a key. It's in mental health, we call it a vital sign. Your diet and your appetite. If you have a sudden increase in the amount of food that you're eating, there might be something wrong. Are we together? There might be something. Consider this. When you have a lot of stress, there are certain people who just by eating use it as a way of feeling better. They call it stress eating. And you end up with a lot of fat on you, which you did not intend. And this dietary aspect is a feature in many different disorders. But here we're talking about depression. Not only an increase, but also a decrease in appetite. Certain people just don't feel hungry. Certain situations come, you haven't eaten, you just drink water, you might be depressed. Number 3, sleep. Sleeping too much, or maybe before I move to sleep. On the criteria for appetite, there are notable changes. So it's not just maybe I ate too much yesterday. It is followed through by changes in weight of at least 5 kg to 10 kg. Gain or loss in a short period of time where you're not dieting towards achieving that. Are we together? Not on a diet to just find the trousers sincerely. You have to make a new hole on the belt. Look around, there might be something to pay attention to. Sleep. Sleeping too much. There are people who sleep as though they say in the community, you go in at 18 hours with the chickens, you come out at lunchtime. And the tragedy of society now is if a person does experience that, they are more likely to be labeled as lazy than they are to be looked out for as being at risk of developing a mental disorder. And it tends to lead to more self-isolation because I feel no one will even understand. So even when they ask, what is the problem? The person just feels like, here, this is what is the problem of trying to pin me. So I will not say anything. And the vicious cycle continues and people end up in more severe forms of depression. Sleeping can lead to which we call insomnia. Failing to initiate sleep, failing to maintain sleep, or waking up too early from sleep and failing to fall again into sleep are all variations of the same problem of insomnia. It could be a feature of depression or it could be a standalone disorder on its own as a sleep disorder. And the management can be different. But here, I'm saying, if you notice changes in your sleeping patterns, there may be things you need to take care of. I'm not saying you've become depressed, but you may be on the road to depression, or you may even be depressed already. Number 4, loss of interest in things that you used to find pleasurable. You see, the mechanisms of the brain are such that you have small guys that are moving around between your neurons, giving each other instructions and helping you feel what you feel. In a state of depression, the ability, the objective ability of a person to experience a pleasureful event is reduced, called anhedonia. Even when things are just elated and happy, they can't inspire that, pleasurable effects that we look forward to. So family vacations don't feel like family vacations. Things like, watching a beautiful sunset no longer make you feel good. Being around people, doing anything that you do. And in this state where you have a diminished ability for pleasure, most people tend to end up in addictive behaviors as a way of getting themselves to feel. So maybe I'll drink alcohol. Maybe I'll take something that makes me high. Maybe I will, do... A lot of people use sex as a coping mechanism. And many have become addicted to it and other forms of it, including pornography, including masturbation, and so on and so forth, as a way of just trying to combat this numbing feeling that I'm experiencing. And then that results in a different disorder altogether. Loss of interest. Even just coming to church. I used to like going to church, enjoyed the prayer band. I find no pleasure in them anymore, says the wise man. Not so. These could be experiences or signs of depression. But when we don't come to church, before people can even find out what the experience it is that we are dealing with, we are labeled as bad you are. And it's a point for people to make fun of. We even start using each other as examples on pulpits because it's what we do. And you can imagine the word gets out, no, this is what was said, this is what, and the rumor mill spreads, and people end up in worse and worse forms of depression. Guilt, excessive feelings of guilt. Where there was one small thing I did wrong. I met a patient who was apologizing for something they did 20 years ago, vehemently apologizing. I don't know, maybe that's why my whole life is just going bad. And yes, it was something that I did wrong. But the extent of the guilt he was experiencing was way beyond the proportions of what was done. As Adventists, we have a tendency to become addicted to our guilt, almost as a way of making ourselves feel good about still knowing or recognizing the standard. So when I go against the standard, I act below or away from my values, below my dignity or my integrity, I use the guilt as a way of making myself feel like a penance, making myself feel better by making it worse for myself. Some of us get to a point of such self-hate, we even treat our pets better than ourselves. It sounds like it's far-fetched. Let me bring it home. You go to a hospital, they tell you, look, this is what you need for your own health. They tell you need to take it for how many days? 7, maybe 14, maybe 1 month. If it's other things like TB, maybe 6 months, 12 months. If it's HIV, the rest of your life. And you decide, no, I will not take it. Because I feel like not taking it. Or maybe if I take this medication, whatever the reason. But our pet, if the vet tells you, put this in the food for 7 days, what do? We put it. Have you cared for yourself more than your pet? No. We know that some of the things we do bring bodily harm to ourselves, and we continue to do it. It becomes a vicious cycle of guilt. I go into this guilt, I act away from my values, and I go back into it. Like a positive feedback loop. And many mental health issues are like that. Like the way these things work, I point it at the speaker picks the signal, sends it back into the mic, and it becomes a positive loop. Excessive guilt. To a point that even to God, we are unable to open up and say, this is what I am suffering with. Even though we know that He already knows. So it's easier to project. We use defense mechanisms. No, people at church, they hate me. Because it's the way you see yourself. And it's a defense mechanism we call projection. To think that other people are seeing me the way I'm seeing myself. When someone just makes a small mistake, no, it's because they just, Mama ni onelamo. No. It might be you projecting your own feelings towards yourself on other people. We need to be able to recognize and get the help that we need. Low levels of energy. People in depression fail to do things that they should. Even just kuchoka bed becomes very difficult. That act of just lifting my leg and putting it on the floor, brushing my teeth, it becomes very difficult. And I know every one of us have experienced some or more than one of the things that we've discussed here. The low levels of energy are influenced by multiple things. Lack of sleep, poor habits in terms of diet, and all of these things, feelings of guilt, which then dampen those neurotransmitters in your brain that help you to feel energetic. They are so low that you cannot even act the way you want to. And as a result of a combination of all of these, but not limited to depression, one of the features is suicidal ideation. Feelings of ending one's own life. And many times we say, no, how can someone want to kill themselves? Life is not ours to choose. But in that state, most people don't even rise up and say, I just want to die. No. It is wanting to rest from the problems they're experiencing. This is louder, huh? Okay. Most people, what they express is, I wish I could just sleep and not wake up. You find people, they know that they need their insulin for life to be able to manage their sugar. All of a sudden, they're just careless in the way they eat. They don't take their medications on time. Could be signs. Okay, this is a bit disturbing. What's happening? Are you able to hear the differences? Or is it just me? Okay. I hope I'm not hallucinating. It could be signs of depression. You know that you need your medication. There is no other way. Why are you choosing not to take it, if not to try to get to your end quicker? And these ideations can bring such a level of guilt for those who believe in God, because they are wondering, how did I get to this place? Marital issues, financial issues, wayward children, job issues bring us to this point. Unrealistic expectations of life. Even things that other people would regard as trivial. Break up with a boyfriend. Loss of something you deem valuable. And you get to a point where you say, I just want to rest. The other way this appears is in what we call non-fatal self-harm. Cutting yourself. Just to feel some level of pain. To feel alive. Because your senses are so numbed. You can't enjoy, you can't experience any other emotions. It is only pain which makes you feel alive. If you are here, you have experienced these thoughts. You feel so neglected, so alone. It feels as though you do the world a favor by deleting yourself at Gotianka Drit. Remove yourself from the equation. Remember this. It may feel as though you are alone, but you are not alone. Seek help. One of the hardest things to do in your lowest moments is to seek help. Sometimes we say, look, people who kill themselves are very courageous, and we trivialize it. You never know who is in the audience of your speech. People are going through things. Some things are going through them. But either way, there is suffering. And we need to be such a people that are sensitive to each other. I lost a close person to me. And one of the last people that he called before he ended his life, he told, I'm failing to cope with life. And it sounded like an everyday call. Failing to cope with life. It's not the first time you're calling me about these things. And you say, All of us have problems, which is true, not so. All of us have problems. Deal with it. And he dealt with it the way he thought best. 6 feet under. We need to be sensitive to these things for ourselves and for the people around us. Mood disorders, depression. On the other side of depression is what we call manic episodes, which are a feature of bipolar disorders. Bipolar is two poles, low and high. Even though being low is a problem, sometimes being high can be also a disorder. Are we together? No, but my depression, as we are never depressed. Be careful. On the higher side of the emotions, there's another disorder. And in the manic phase, these are people who are overly energetic. Inappropriately so sometimes. Even when things are so bad, they're just, Now I'm not saying that all extroverts are disordered. There's a level of appropriateness and functionality. So being overly elated too much every time you're just excited is not normal. A normal person comes to what we call a euthymic phase, where the emotions are just stable. You are just fine. You're cool. Not it could also be a problem. And many people who are like that have a higher risk of also going into depression. Other features, reckless behavior. They take on things that are very, very risky. We had a bipolar patient once when I was a student who got a company card and flew to South Africa and was buying out shops, a true bowler. Just going to a store, Apple shop, what is the quantity of this stock that is here on display? So much, so much, so much. Swipe. Shop closed. All the stock has been bought. It took legal processes to start reversing those things to show, look, this person was not okay. Some of us, our financial behaviors, spending carelessly. They could be features. I'm not saying they are. I'm saying they could be. Reckless behavior. People who go out and are having sex anyhow in manic phases, people behave like that. Very reckless. No concern for was it a condom? Was there a condom? Do I know this person? Nothing. It's a human being. It can happen. It will happen. Reckless behaviors. Elated mood. Grandiosity. It's like a grandiose delusion. These people feel larger than life. So large that sometimes they can even be brothers to God. No, Jesus is my young brother. That level. But sometimes it might not be that bizarre. You just feel bigger than everything. No, if we're above everyone, there's confidence and there's mania. Please, let us not cross sign. So the bipolar disorder exists where in a moment you are in this elated mood, you do all of these things and the neurons are firing very quickly. At a certain period, usually between a week and 2, they tire. And so you start dipping into this depressed state. And for most people, it is at that transition between the manic phase and depression that they consider suicide. Let me tell you why. You can imagine this godly young man is coming out of this manic phase where they were doing all sorts of things. They discover they've slept with 7 people after keeping myself for marriage. And in that recovery, they are realizing exactly what they've done. And the weight of that realization makes them feel like there's nothing worth living for tomorrow. It's better I end my life. Those are generally what we see in the mood disorders, bipolar mood disorders, and depression. We'll move on to anxiety disorders. Anxiety is a state of feeling worried. Oh, by the way, to meet the criteria for severe depression, you just need 5 of those things that I've said. For severe depression, clinical depression, anything sub 5 might be moderate or mild, but still needs to be dealt with. Anxiety disorder is a state of worry. It's excessive. And here, let me use this illustration of a feedback loop to just explain what happens. The same way that, you speak into the mic speaks into from the speaker, the sound goes into the mic and creates that loop. When we experience a trigger, something that makes us anxious, how we respond to it is part of the problem of developing the disorder. And here I'll combine with substance use disorders before I sit down. I've used more than the time I said I would. So what happens is, I go to the shopping mall, for instance, and something happens. I witness an accident, a robbery, or something. It makes me feel anxious. So I move from there and say, okay, I'm done with the shopping mall, let me just go home. I go home and I feel better. At this point, it's just an unfortunate occurrence, not so? But the next time now I need to go to the shopping mall, I feel a little scared because it might happen again. But I say, it was just a once-off thing. I think it will be okay. So I go to the shopping mall. This time, nothing may have even happened. Or something maybe just like a door banging or slamming or whatever it is happens. And I get that same emotional response. And so now I steal away. I may or may not achieve what I'm going there to do. And when I go home, I realize when I walk away from this situation, I feel better. So in that feeling better, the brain has been taught that this mall is a dangerous place. Because nature is very practical. You run away from it as we say, oh, this is danger, we should not go there. So the next time I say, okay, instead of going to the mall, because I feel so scared to go there, let me go to a nearby shopping complex. And I realize I get the same emotional reaction. And so the mall and the shopping complex are dangerous. Don't go there. The fear reaction is so big. What I'm describing is how people develop a particular aspect of anxiety disorders called agoraphobia, where they have fear of almost everything, fear of open spaces, fear of being with people. And so they go, they come back, and they're adding things to that list. I meet a dog, I feel that reaction. I start being afraid of dogs to a point where I am scared of almost everything. I just stay within my house. Even in that house, they could run away from it if they could, but they have no choice. So this experience of this fear reaction makes them so dysfunctional, they can't deal with the simple stress of going to the shop, because for them it is not that simple anymore. So the solution, which has been running away, becomes part of the problem. Let me combine. Alcohol and other substances, depressants, hallucinogens, stimulants, so on and so forth. The first time I do it, because the alcohol sits on what we call a GABA receptor, it relaxes the brain. The same thing that we use the same receptors that some drugs we use sit on. The brain becomes relaxed. So I drink and I drink and I feel better. I've drunk my money away. The next morning, I'm experiencing a hangover. Hangover is the colloquial term for withdrawal. Because from the point that I stop drinking, the blood alcohol levels will plateau and then start to drop. And as they drop, it comes with certain feelings. Up to this point, you're just an unfortunate guy who has used all their money on alcohol. After that, the problem comes when you realize that drinking again solves the feeling of the hangover. So the body has now learned that when I'm in hangover, alcohol helps me to feel better. And so the solution becomes the problem. Are we together? And so it is with other addictive behaviors. Let me touch a bit on sexual behaviors. You see, there is such a thing as too much sex. It is there from a physiological point of view. Because when you have above normal experiences with these things, for instance, alcohol, there's a normal way that those receptors can be stimulated. When you take alcohol, it's a supranormal exposure. The concentration is too high. In the natural world, it wouldn't occur that way. Similarly with sex, when the exposure is too high, you see, with these behaviors that end up being addictive, novelty is the thing that draws us in. So when you have indiscriminate exposure to these things, from sex, usually it is those adventurous behaviors. There are people who will say, no, illegal sex is the one that feels nice. And they're not lying, because it has a sense of novelty. In most of the marriages, after you've hit the 3.5-year mark and the euphoric stage has gone, things kind of hit a dull. And it is at these junctures that many people tend to act away from their values in search of a new experience, because the mind is used to this high level of exposure. If it's not going out, it is pornographic material, very unrealistic. But you can have different partners, different sizes, different colors, even simultaneously. It creates such a problem that to fill that void which comes when you don't have access to it, the problem seems to be part of the solution. Because the natural order seems not good enough. And it is in this process that we develop addictions. And as we continue being exposed to these higher supranormal concentrations and levels of these things, the body starts to respond, upregulates, downregulates whatever it needs to do in the brain in terms of receptors and neurotransmitters to just help you meet the demands. And recovering from that can be a big thing. There are people who have spent years praying this is the last time, who are convinced it is just a spiritual matter, who might just need mental help to deal with some of these things. Am I saying it's not necessary for us to be prayerful and faithful? No. But let that faith lead you to a place where the solutions are. Sometimes we struggle for longer than we need to because of emotions such as shame. In the 11-hour service, the pastor was referring to the Garden of Eden and how Adam and Eve, after they eat of the fruit, they realize they are naked. And it leads them to hide, to run away in fear. They call it fear, not so. Why are you hiding? We are afraid. What was the solution to their being afraid? Covering themselves. Because the emotion that they experienced, shame. Whatever it is, those leaves that you use to cover whatever it is that you think are causing you shame will wither and dry. We need Christ for our mental health. Because even Christ, in dealing with that shameful situation, gets the skin of another animal and covers them. Was that the permanent solution? It took himself, God, to come down to deal with that. And shame is just a thing, it's an emotion, not so. I'll tell you one thing as I wind down. After my accident this morning, I experienced a heavy dosage of shame. And most people don't realize this, and I share this to help you realize that sometimes the experiences that people go through, the emotions we think, we suspect they'll be feeling or dealing with, we forget the critical ones. People say, no, be grateful for life. Yes, I am. But I still feel ashamed. Why? Because there are multiple points in the process where I feel I could have avoided the incidents. Am I blameless? No. More reason to feel shame. And as you see these things, you are right. But that does not help with the emotion I'm feeling. And I use this illustration to say, and thank the leadership and the membership here, because the support that I've received following that has helped me. Because it was a loving response. Many times, love is more powerful than truth. The elders could have chosen to just spit the truth. You were driving too fast, and they would be right. But it would not be as helpful as the love they showed. We may be struggling and dealing with different mental issues. People around us may be struggling, psychotic issues. Love may be more important for them. than truth without love. But the ultimate solution God gives us is to share the truth in love. Let us go out there. Be the truth that God has given us and share it in love. So that we are helping each other not only battle our psychological and mental health issues, but also the battle against sin. Just slapping each other with the truth that I am a prostitute will not help me not be a prostitute. I know. I even know more than what you know about my prostitution. So show me, show each other, show the world the love of Christ. And together we'll make this place a safe haven where we can be able to share the struggles, the challenges that we go through, and enable each other across the line into glorification when Jesus comes. Amen.
Amen, church. We can take a few questions. Do we have some questions? Okay, we have one there. Any other questions there? Okay. Oh, you have a mic. Okay. Doc, you can. Oh, you can drink the water.
Good afternoon, church. My question, I was so touched when he was teaching us about in the field of insomnia, lack of sleeping. As for now, I don't know how can you help us due to the time of load shedding. Me, I'm a fashion and designer, so we find that we have a lot of things we are supposed to make, but many hours we don't have power. So we are forced to use power during night. We spend maybe a few hours to sleep, maybe three or 2 hours to sleep. So I don't know how are you going to help us, because we need to finish this work. Maybe you have a large piece of work to do, but times are very few. So we really need help or answer where we can deal with that problem.
All right, thank you. You got the question? Okay. There was another hand. Other than her, is there another hand? May I just see the hands so that we know how many questions we have to deal with? Okay, there is one that side. Okay, the mic can, after you can share the mic with her.
I've 3 questions. What's the difference between a feeling and an emotion? One. And then also on narcissism. I think these days it's become very popular. Everyone talking about narcissism. Probably some of us suspect ourselves of being narcissists. We don't know. Maybe we're narcissists, or we suspect other people of being narcissists. So what is narcissism? Is it curable? Is it what is it? Is it a mental illness? And then the third thing is, I'm aware that you say you work at Chainama. So maybe it would be useful to just let people know where they can find help. Is it free? Can people just go there and talk to someone? Because sometimes it's difficult to talk to people that you know, especially like within the church settings, for fear of being judged, and sometimes you can't talk to someone that you know because of they already have these preconceived notions about you. So is there a place where people can talk to someone without being judged? Is it free and freely accessible? Yeah.
Okay, we'll have, for this round, she'll ask the last question. Then we will take your question, and I saw another hand. Can I see the hand there? Okay, Dr. Tinta. Then is there another question in that tent? Far behind. Okay, can the microphones go down that far? Or maybe they can come closer. At the far end, could you please come closer in preparation for your question? You can
So
go
I
ahead.
can ask?
Yes, please.
Okay, I want to know how I can help a friend after I have realized too late that this person might have had a mental problem and I had already injured them, maybe I judged them truthfully so fast that they are so injured, but now I have realized and I would love to help. How can I help? Then again, how can I help a friend who has resorted to sex as something to relieve themselves, but it doesn't even make sense even for themselves? Like, it's not the actual cure, but that's their resort.
Thank you very much for these questions. I'll try to deal with them as briefly as possible. I realize my talk time is very excessive, so I'll try and limit the talking to the time. Mental health issues and the problem of load shedding. I sympathize with you, because the times that we are living in, we received a patient at Chainama whose business went down because of load shedding. Trained in a field, not employed, found a business to do to help, and now load shedding hit, and they can't do that. They can't provide, and they literally dropped into depression because of it. We need to survive. And sometimes we've been called to very strenuous schedules to just keep up, to just stay alive. And these schedules might not be optimal for health, but they might be required for survival. So what do we do then? While we know that the optimal hours of sleep are the ones of the night, sometimes you might have to settle for second best. If you've worked at night, grant your body the rest during the day. It might not be as restful, because we even know from E.G. White, she says an hour before midnight is worth 2 hours after midnight. But find that time to schedule your periods of rest so that your body can be able to recoup. If you sleep 1 hour at night and you're awake the whole day, you just doze off here and there, you will crash. Rest is essential for health. So find the time to rest. I know business is happening during the day. You want to produce the products at night and be able to interact with people to get new clients. You need to find the balance. And part of having good mental health doesn't mean that you will avoid the negatives altogether. It is that you will be able to split the hair and say, I will trade off a few new clients to preserve my health. And I will work as much as I can when I can to be able to catch up. Sometimes the situations become worse because, I'm not saying this is your situation, I'm just saying generally, sometimes we end up being a little less focused on what we need to do. We spend half the time complaining about the problem and half the time working on the problem. Increase the levels of efficiency. If it means having to schedule your social time, remove your social media time except for when you need it for your business and all of these things. Work around it so that it's not an either or. Find a way you can have a bit of health and resources. Because the resources, if they come and your health is not there, you will give all your money to me. And I will take it to try and regain you your health, which you could have, to a certain extent, prevented if you tried as much as possible to do what you can. Am I saying it is easy? No. Am I saying it's just a walk in the park? No. The times we're living in are hard. And I wish I could say they will be better. But we know that the times of the end, events will happen, first of all, in quick succession with high intensity. I am more confident to say it might get worse than I am to say it will get better. And on this point, on this question, I will say, which means as a family, then we need to also look out for each other. Those who have access to more passive income, we must be able to look out for each other and support. Because some of our own colleagues will go under prematurely while we were able to help. Difference between feeling and emotion. on a colloquial space, it's pretty much semantics. What I feel is like a description of the emotion that, or the experience of the emotions that I name. So whatever it is I'm experiencing, where I usually like to draw a bit of a comparison is between the emotion and the mood. Because the emotion, what I'm feeling now, and the mood is a bit more, it's almost like climate and weather. And this is where we ask, are men more moody than women? We think that men are a bit more moody. They sustain a particular emotional state longer than certain women. The only difference is that most men don't express it. So it's not known that it is there. The women on the other side are very emotional. They react to this thing. And when something similar happens, they can pull it from the past and bring it to the present. So I hope that helps with that. But basically, more or less the same thing. Narcissism is a personality disorder. Personality disorders have 3 categories: cluster A, cluster B, and cluster C. Cluster A is the eccentric type, where people just don't look like they fit in to the normal society. They look like if the circle is here, they're always outside the circle. Schizotypal, personality disorders, and the others that exist under there. Cluster B is where narcissism is found. It is called the dramatic cluster. You have the narcissists. And narcissism is basically an feeling too important, like an overemphasis on my importance. Everything is about me. And it's been a word that has been abused in certain spaces, but not to mean that it does not exist. There are people who everything is about them. Even when you say, look, you made me feel this way. No, me, hey, what? You know, there's no consideration for other people. It's just me, myself, and I. It is like a pathological selfishness. That's just about the individual. Is it a disorder? Yes. Is it there? Yes. Can they be helped? Yes. It's not easy, but they can. Therapy is the mainstay of treatment for such disorders. For those who live with people who they believe to be narcissistic, I usually recommend this. Recognize, first of all, that their behaviors, their choices are outside your control. You can't make them choose what you want. But boundary setting is within your control. Learn to draw your boundaries. Can it cause problems to draw boundaries with narcissistic people? Yes, they don't like it. But it is within your control to say, I appreciate that you feel that's the way you want to address this. However, I will not be part of the discussion if this is how it will go. I am willing to discuss it on these terms. That way of talking to me, I do not appreciate. I would appreciate if you talked to me in such and such a manner. Are we together? Setting boundaries. Are these easy things? No. They are much more complicated in the real world because they come with emotions. How do I set this boundary? It might look like rejection, and they can be manipulative, making you feel like, you've thrown me to the curb. All the bad things that will happen to me now are your fault. It might not be true, but those are things that we go through in dealing with such issues. Is it curable? It can be managed. Cure, I'm not very sure. But we can learn, because a personality is a pervasive trait that exists across different societies. So teaching people how to manage the traits that they espouse is not very, very easy. Where to find help? I work at Chainama. Other public facilities may have mental health units. It's being decentralized. I don't know how far it has gone, but just try with your local clinic. Ask if they have a mental health unit. If they do not, ask where you can go, the nearest place. If the nearest place is not available, UTH, Chainama, you are assured of getting services there. Chainama, I know, also has a functional unit and a few others. There are some private ones who have not paid me for advertising, but because of help that people need, you can try them. There's Renaissance in Kablonga, there's Silver Lining in North Mid, there's Great North Academy, and a few others that are there. Some of them focus more on substance use issues, some of them focus on general mental health issues, and so on and so forth. Please feel free to visit these places and get the services you need. If your insurance policy has that allocation for you, please make use of it. It is better to get the help before the problem becomes severe. Because at a certain point, there are certain brain changes we might not be able to reverse, and certain dispositions may be with you for the rest of your life. How do I help a friend who I injured? Maybe you did not react or respond well to a particular friend. First of all, it starts by you realizing. When you realize, you have started the process of solving it. The second thing is owning up to it, taking responsibility. Let me introduce a principle here. It's called attribution bias. We have a tendency to attribute good results to ourselves and bad things to things around us when it comes to us. But when it comes to people around us, we attribute bad things to themselves and good things to the things around them. Let me give an example. When you found a good husband and you are married well, you said it's because you prayed, because you kept yourself and so on. When your friend found a good husband, it was because of the family, it was because of everything apart from who they are. We have a tendency to have positive attribution to ourselves and negative attribution to other people. Taking responsibility for the things we do wrong is a step towards healing. So you own up and say, I'm sorry that I did this, in whatever words that you use, and show them that I am willing to support. Validate when they are not trusting of you. And this is an issue, because we think that sorry reverses everything. No. That you broke my trust and came to say sorry doesn't mean it will automatically be restored. Trust is earned. So allow yourself to be vulnerable to their lack of trust in you for you to develop that trust if it's that important to you. And then work with them, show them that you are able to or willing to help them even where you might not be able to take away the actual problem. Sex issues. This issue has been considered taboo in our society, that many people have struggled and suffered and ruined their lives in privacy. If you are privileged or not privileged, or however you consider it, to know about someone who is dealing with this thing, first of all, it is not you to go and rub it in their face. Love is very key. Show them that you are able to separate, first of all, the problem from them by being respectful. That disrespect we show to people with psychosis, no, gunyu masaka. It goes almost everywhere. And that makes people feel I am equal to my problem. But showing people that even with this problem, I respect you as a person, I will categorically let you know that I do not agree with this, I think it is wrong. But you as an individual, I continue to respect and support. Those are the kind of dispositions that encourage people to give in to seeking help. When we are too attacking, defense mechanisms will take precedence. Blaming, avoiding, and so on and so forth. So showing that, look, I'm here to help you. They might not accept it, but that's beyond your control. What's within your control is to do your best to show that I'm here and I'm willing to help. It is a very touchy thing, so when they share with you, you must be their grave. To hear it from a third person is betrayal of the highest order. Sometimes we make it look as though we are looking for help for them. I don't know how to help this person. Listen to what they said. And you are now talking about things. The next thing, it is in the common space, a public secret, where people are joking about it and everyone knows who they are talking about. And from their experience, they only said it to one set of ears. That level of betrayal is what makes everyone else who sees, because you see, even the people you are talking to, you are not sure that they don't have that problem. This also applies in suicide. When you are there busy saying, no, this person is weak, how do they climb a tower and try to kill? You don't know that they are not thinking that. So inadvertently, you might be telling someone at the brink of a decision that they are weak, they are worthless, they are cowards. The same way you go and say, you see that one, how can you struggle with masturbation? Imagine, like he's not married. You don't know who you are talking to. And most times the people who jest and laugh at people with weaknesses are people with the same weakness undiscovered. So we need to show love and help support each other through these things. If someone confides in you, brothers and sisters, let us respectfully handle their business. Sometimes the worst evil comes from how we mishandle people's private matters than from the problem itself. So that's the way I think we can help. If it is beyond us, refer them to a mental health specialist. They may need that help. They probably do need that help. It might be beyond just willpower to come out of it. They may need the support, give them the mechanisms and strategies to help them as they continue to pray and believe in the power of God. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have a question. How do we help someone who just wakes up? For no reason, they are just upset. They did not talk to anybody. If you ask the reason why they're upset, they just start crying bitterly as if somebody has beaten them or there's a funeral somewhere. Because I think I'm experiencing, not even think, I've been experiencing this with, first it was my grandmother, she passed away, and then now my mom behaves the same. And then my young sister as well, for her it's even worse because 90% of her time she spends in our bedroom, she has locked herself. So I don't know because it just doesn't make sense to me. So I don't know how to help them. They are my family.
So we have 2 more questions. 3, okay. So church, please forgive us for going beyond. I think the questions will help everyone of us. Yeah, because these are practical issues. So I am bombarded with more questions than I expected. We'll take 2 more, then we'll do the last 2. Or even, okay.
Thank you. I want to speak of the biopsychosocial model, sometimes spiritual model, that you spoke about, and how it relates to us, Africans and Christians. I want you to answer it from our context. We see it in the books and also in the ways that there's a lot of indication for psychotherapy. There are so many things that will make you send a patient to psychotherapy. Now, here where we mourn in large numbers, where we can say, let's pray about it, my brother, where we think that our social interactions sometimes help deal with a lot of problems. How is your experience in terms of psychosocial psychotherapy? Do we send everybody for therapy, or do you think that some of the African things that we do, some of the Christian things that we do actually help? And how do you draw the line? And then just a quick short one related to that. Insight. If a patient knows that I'm dealing with this, is it helpful or is it sometimes deleterious? Can it cause problems?
Thank you for this opportunity. In fact, I had about 3 questions, but I will drop the 2 because of the number of people and time. We don't have time. Doc, I just wanted to know, because you had touched on the forgiveness. Somebody could have done, a case about 20 years ago, then he comes to apology. I've seen that there's a thin line between Christianity and the social, whatever you are telling us about the apology. Then, if somebody goes to apology, because in Christianity they say, to be pure, to enter the kingdom of heaven, you have to apologize. Or first, if you are wronged your friends, you go to apologize to them. I'm sorry, brother. 20 years ago, I happened to hit your young brother, or you. Now I want you to forgive me so that I enter the kingdom of heaven, and you are forgiven. But now you are telling us that that's a sign of depression or maybe mental case. So I don't know if you can elaborate more on that one. Thank you.
Doc, can we take the other last three questions. Maybe in your responses you may, combine.
Thank you. Doc, I would want to ask about panic attacks. So, what really causes the panic attacks, and then is there a way they can be managed, or is there a cure for a panic attack, or maybe somebody has to just learn to live with it?
Oh, I wanted to ask if attachment issues can be considered as a disorder. Like, I have a friend who is attached to a friend, more like they are obsessed. When they see that person with someone else, they get upset, extremely upset. So I wanted to ask if attachment issues can be considered as a disorder.
And they are not married, eh?
My question is, there are, I don't know how you take it. I want to bring it in form of a statement. There are people, when you are talking to them, even before you get a conclusion, they start already condemning you. Even when they're just coming to you, they will say that I knew, before you even open your mouth, I knew you were going to say this. Like, for example, a man gets soaked, very soaked, and then the rain drenches him and the cold gets into him. And he starts walking towards where he has seen a light. And on his way, he starts ranting. So that person there is comfortable. Me, I'm getting soaked. How can it be like this? Now, why? Why is this like this? Then when they reach there, they are already annoyed and they just start knocking. Then somebody comes out of the house and just says, how may I help you? No, I know. You are comfortable. Me, I'm okay. What is this? I'm soaked. You are not soaked. So how do you take such a character, and how would you help such a person with the battle psychiatric arrangement?
Over to you, Doc.
Thank you very much. Another good set of questions. Uncontrolled or uncontrollable emotional expressions, excessive crying, and so on and so forth. There are 3 vital signs that we look at when we talk about mental health to ascertain. The vital signs generally are oxygen saturations, respiratory rate, temperature, blood pressure, and so on. With mental health, it's a bit different because it's difficult to measure some things. In fact, some of my colleagues say that we are close to witch doctors because things are difficult to measure. Number 1 is their mood. If the mood is so deranged and controlled and whatever, it's a clear or an indication that something might not be well with their mental health. The mood, the appetite or diet, and their sleep. When these 3 are affected, look around the mental health issue. You bring about an important element of a family pattern. Nature or nurture, we don't know. It could be a bit of both. There could be genetic predisposition to having these mood episodes. I can't diagnose them. It would be against the law. I've not examined. I don't know what the exact experience is. But a predisposition to these episodes, I'll call them for now, or it could be a learned behavior. That in certain circumstances, when you fail to work around certain things, you just lean into this emotional disposition as a way to make you feel well. And it could have created that positive feedback loop where you learn that when I isolate myself, I kind of feel better. It doesn't solve the problem, but it makes that behavior likely to recur. And it becomes a disorder in that it makes you a bit dysfunctional, or even maybe very dysfunctional. You're not able to meet your goals, your objectives, work around through your society. How can we help? It's not very easy. It's not very, especially when you're dealing with fellow adults who may not see eye to eye with your observation. They may be looking for a certain response from you, as a way, it might be a very poor way of communicating needs without actually communicating them, and an unrealistic expectation that you must answer and attend to them. It is not a very foreign thing if you think about it. Many couples go through a lot of problems because of the same. Failing to ask for specific help. You know, you just show signs that things are not okay, and you expect people to kind of guess what is going on. From your end, what can you do? In a very caring way, as far as they allow, attempt to find out what are they experiencing. Not just that this is, sometimes the way we tell people that there's a problem, we tell it as, your crying is disturbing me. Such that people learn to cry so that they don't disturb you. Because that's what is concerning to you. But trying to find out what are the issues underlying this behavior. They may not always be forthright. Even with us professionals, sometimes it can take up to 4 reviews before people start opening up to help you, like to get you into a space where you understand what they're experiencing. So find out individually from them. It could be a pattern, it could be something, or if it's very disturbing, find out if they would be willing to get someone to help them. You might find that we think, no, they just lean into this behavior, they like it. Sometimes they don't like it, and they just don't know any better. I don't know what else to do. So if they're willing to see someone and help them get an assessment in and see what they might be experiencing or going through, that could be helpful. Will it solve the problem 100% of the time? No. But as I say, I lean back into the statement, genuine care can be picked. People can see that this person is looking out for me. Sometimes they may not, but over time, consistently, they start to understand that the concern is actually for them, not against them. Many people with mental illnesses, their experiences will not make sense to us. Because we are not, when we talk about being empathetic in mental health, I know people say empathy is putting yourself in one man's shoes. The reality is, if there's someone who fits my shoe size, and it's not a very big shoe, it's a small one, if you're able to fit, just the shape of your foot prevents you from the comfortability that I fit into this shoe with. You will not fit and reach every corner the way I reach it. So whatever the case, the best we can do in being empathetic is to care genuinely. Be genuinely. You see, there are some of us who care as a form of curiosity. What happened, my brother? Just to calm your curious mind. But genuine care is I am listening to look out for you, to see where I can be able to assist you to work through this issue. Are we together? So whatever it is that might be going on, I'm not sure, but if they can get an assessment in, we might be able to see how we can make either a diagnosis or maybe just enable them to manage their situations a little better. Biopsychosocial model and the African Zambian context, 2 things come here. A very important topic to me, my initial research was going to be around mental health in our rural areas, just to try and quantify and describe the phenomena that are going on. There are certain things that have happened in our culture even that are not being accounted for as a starting point. Before, like now we assume that, if you have a grievance, you have that support. People mourn in numbers. But the reality is that the way it's done now, I wasn't there before, but I'm assuming that there was a more intentional, prolonged support system. Many times now, people just show up to Chongesha. I know at least we passed through. And so by the time the shock of this loss is going down and they're starting to gain insight into the fact that they've lost this important figure, usually they are alone at that point. There is usually no one. If they are there, very few, who are also expecting that by now you should have been done with dealing with this issue of loss. So when the people come and they're presenting, no, I still feel sad, I cry about my spouse. 15 years later, you're still crying. And those are the dispositions that are coming in now. So there's been this gap that is being left, assumed to be present. No, they have family members. The friends will say, oh no, may have business. The family members also have business. And things are just moving on, and they end up being left behind. In the ideal sense, the cultural community structure that we had was helpful for many things. Because when you have your teenage crisis, you had your uncles, you had the insaka, you had the events that were organized to help you cope. But now, for instance, I grew up to a certain point was in boarding school. So the knowledge, the practical knowledge that my parents have had of me up to that point, they start to lose grip of. Because what I'm doing in my boarding school, they might not be aware. So the old system where, the young people are growing, they are big, they have a watchful eye was helpful. And even though it had its negative tenets as well, to a certain extent, the good parts also started being lost in this modernization or development where my uncle is not even a friend. I can't go and talk to him about anything. I'm trying to make a decision for marriage. My mother is still traditional. She can't talk it to me directly. My uncle is not available. So then the space that's being filled by other things, social media and the influence of the global market or the global village and all. So yes, there are those experiences which are helpful in our context, but it still leaves room for us to be able to support each other because a lot of people are falling through the cracks. A lot of people are falling through the cracks. And even though it might be strange to us to sit down with some guy and start talking about our issues, sometimes it might be the only avenue that we have. Because sometimes the only thing we will do in therapy is help you make a linkage to your family so that there can be a more sustained support system. And then we do what we call family therapy to help them understand your situation and help you understand their situation. So therapy is not like a replacement for everything. Sometimes it's the avenue through which we rebuild the things that we need in our societies. When a child is having difficulty communicating with a parent and the parent has no idea how to navigate communication with the child, sometimes just come in and mediate that. Are we the only ones who can do it? We are trained for it, so we kind of do it better. But sometimes you'll find other community members, elderly people with experience, can also play this role. It's important, though, that any person who works in this space must be able to also anticipate the bad things that can come out. So be careful of how you put your own value systems and worldview when you're resolving other people's problems. And that's why sometimes we still recommend to see the specialists because then they're able to kind of be aware of that bias. And when it becomes too much, they will transfer you to someone else who is not yet as biased as they are. But the case for psychotherapy in Africa, strong. Does it have to be the way it has been done in the Western cultures? Maybe not. Zimbabwe have a program they call the Friendship Bench. They designed it, as a psychiatrist, they designed it, and the model basically leans on the fact that it's the grandmothers who sit at this bench. So it's like a bench in the community, usually maybe at a clinic or somewhere, and this grandmother who is trained in this skill of identifying the mental disorders sits there and talks to these people, youth, adults, and helps them in things like problem-solving therapy, acceptance therapy, and all of those things to help them get along. So there are ways that we can adapt some of the good innovations that have come to our culture and help us work with that, because it's not unusual for us to have a grandmother talk you through things. They're very kind, understanding, have experience and wisdom and all of those things. And Zimbabwe have ridden on that. It is something that is spreading along the way, and we are hopeful that more innovations will come through. I hope that helps. Insight, simple answer. Insight is a good prognostic factor, meaning when someone knows that they have a problem, the outcome is usually better than for someone who doesn't know. Also because it is an indicator of severity. When someone is developing schizophrenia is a psychotic disorder where people start seeing things that are not there and their behavior becomes disorganized. Usually what we see as Wolfuntamrod could be having schizophrenia. When it's just starting, I've seen a few, they know. I feel like my thoughts are being taken away from me. I feel like my brain is just going blank. And so they opt to be in spaces where their functionality is not, like they don't need cognitive power to do their work. And that's how they end up now just walking the streets, hearing things, talking to themselves, picking trash, talking to the trash, and all of those things. When they get to that point, they are not able to differentiate or to know that this is a disorder that I'm having. So they just feel like when they think that the Chiboto is talking to them, they think it's real. And they talk back to the Boto and they'll argue, no, and you're looking at them, you're thinking, what's going on? So anyone who has insight into their condition has a better outcome. But if they don't receive help in time, they may lose insight. And then you have to start doing therapy to try and get them back to gaining that insight, which we call insight-oriented therapy, which may or may not produce the outcomes you want. And after that, then the prognosis changes. Apology versus excessive guilt. I gave an example of a man who was apologizing vehemently for something he did wrong long ago. The point is not that you should not apologize. The point I was driving is that this guy, even when he had apologized and people had forgiven him, continued to bear the guilt of it, which was the sign that was the feature of depression that I was emphasizing at that point. So if you feel that I've remembered an offense I did to my brother and I want to apologize for it, please, by all means, go ahead and apologize. If you realize that even after they've forgiven you, you continue going back to apologize for the same thing, crying very bad, because then that's where the problem comes. So the apologizing is not the problem. It is the excessive feelings of guilt. Even when provision has been made for forgiveness and all of those things, the person just fails to bring themselves to a point where they accept the forgiveness and move on because of the changes in the brain that cause them to present with depression. Panic attacks, these are a form of anxiety disorder in which a person starts to have an acute, which is an instantaneous fear reaction, sometimes to nothing or sometimes to a very small trigger. And when this happens repeatedly and they start to live in fear of developing those panic attacks, then they develop what we call a panic disorder, a panic attack disorder. And yes, there's treatment for it, both pharmacological, that is drugs, and therapeutic in terms of psychotherapy or talk therapy to help them adjust. Mechanisms that we use in therapy that we pretty much work with are to help them identify and quantify the threats and then able to kind of regulate their emotional responses to whatever it is that happens. Recognizing triggers and managing the triggers well is also another thing that we would do with them. So there is help. There are people who end up living without having experienced panic attacks for a very, very long time. So there is definitely help. Let them find some care with the mental health system. Attachment issues. On its own, not a disorder, but it can become disordered. And there's what we call unhealthy attachments, where in the normal developmental process, the child has a primary attachment figure, usually the mother, but it's not always the mother, but usually it's the mother. And as the child grows, the child is weaned off, starts learning how to explore the world in a very controlled way. So if you have children, you'll notice that you go to the park, and as long as you're available, initially they were just on your leg, just with you. They go to another person, they cry, they come back, they're okay. Then with time, they're able to go around your chair. Then they're able to go around other few chairs as long as you are in sight. And with time, as they develop, they are now comfortable in even foreign spaces, even when that primary attachment figure is not there, meaning that they've been weaned off and they're able now to exist as an independent figure. Sometimes we have unhealthy attachments that go on even into adulthood, or some which we develop, especially when we have what we call trauma attachments. You go through something bad, rebound relationships, and all of those things. You feel excessively in love and have a very unnaturally deep connection with this person. Usually, it could be an unhealthy attachment, such that even when it's detrimental to yourself, you do not to disengage yourself from it. It's like it's my lifeline. I can't do anything without him. Beaten and beaten, kicked and kicked, hunger, no hunger, abused, all of these things. Almost everyone else is just able to say, look, just leave. But because of that disposition in terms of attachment, it becomes very, very difficult for this individual. And this disordered attachment can be a feature of a few different kinds of mental health disorders, and they can get help to help them. Is it always the case that when they seek help, it will result in different decisions? Even the therapist cannot control we don't tell you what to do. We try to help you realize your situation and get you to think around a solution which represents what you want to achieve to help you become more functional in your own space. So unhealthy attachments are a thing. Even in the church, there are people who can be attached to church structures and not attached to God, such that the impact of the people in the church is stronger on them than the influence of God himself. Because we have neglected to attach ourselves to the vine, we are attached to other structures, and it can be unhealthy. Does it mean we should be disengaged from our church systems? No. But the point, be attached to the true vine. And that true vine is the healthiest attachment. Then you will be able to manage your attachment systems around you on the vertical aspect. The last question was around, I think it was Elder Solochi, who was saying, this person who has this preconceived disposition and dumps it on another person who has no idea where they've come from. Two things that I wanted to talk about. Number one, blocks of listening. Blocks of listening, B-L-O-C-K-S, a block, like a hindrance to listening. There are about 12 common ones that people talk about, things that keep people from listening, even when they are in conversation. Number one, over-familiarization. I come to you and tell you, look, me at home, my wife, even me. You haven't even listened to what I'm saying. You are already familiarizing with a problem you already have in your own space. So now your attention has moved from what I'm saying to what is your own experience. And usually, those are the people that, sorry, I didn't get what you said. Or you finish, you reach a question, you ask, so what do you think? The mind has already gone thinking about their own things. Are we together? You have other blocks of listening, such as wanting to give solutions. Your friend is explaining something to you, you are already thinking about what to say back to them. You are not listening. So we need to be aware of our blocks of listening as a first step. Mind reading is what he was referring to, where someone starts talking, they haven't yet even said, I know what you're going to say. So they already start with the response to what you were going to say, which you have not even said. It's a block of listening. Someone has come to start telling you, I know you're going to be upset. Like if I go home and I say, look, this is what has happened. We will not have transport for the next few weeks because, and then my wife starts to talk. And what the first two words she says, I knew you were going to say that I'm careless, I'm a careless driver. What. I'm mind reading. I'm not allowing the person to express their mind and then respond to that. I've predetermined what I think they will say and then will respond to that, almost as a way to justify my emotional state, maybe of anger or whatever it is, because I've failed to regulate or identify that maybe I'm feeling ashamed, maybe I'm feeling embarrassed, maybe I'm feeling afraid, maybe I'm feeling disappointed in myself. And all of these emotions can easily bore up, and most especially men will express it as anger. Because how do I go and say, baby, I feel very embarrassed about the accident this morning. It's not a natural thing. So small thing, mbama muliwe, child comes this side, kick. And we're expressing those emotions as anger without realizing and regulating them. The second part of it, in the question that you asked, is when a person comes, one of the big indicators of being successful now is grit, just being able to do it again, even after you failed. But one of the other competing or contending ones for top spot is emotional intelligence. Before, people thought just being intelligent, IQ, is good enough. But now they're realizing that emotional intelligence and grit are very key predictors to success. Emotional intelligence, as I said earlier, is where one is able to recognize their own emotional state. I am upset because I think these people are enjoying while I am in this discomfort. It's like when I go to the road and I'm hiking a bus to go to work, and then my friend passes with their car. My emotional state might be of anger, of resentment to him, even though he's innocent, because me, I don't have. But to recognize that this is my emotional state, not his, and then to be able to recognize what that person's emotional state is as and when I choose to engage with them is very key. Because then I can tell if it's an appropriate time for me to go and say to Elder Zico, Elder Zico, this is the issue. Or if it's an inappropriate time. Whether the most appropriate thing is to say, are you okay? Or to come and bring a problem. That ability to tell what's the emotional state of an individual self and another person, which we call the theory of mind, being able to recognize that state of mind of another person is important. And then the next step is what defines maturity, emotional regulation. So I can resent you and be upset, but because I realize in my thoughts it's not your fault, I will regulate my emotion and express it in a more appropriate way, which is where the behavior comes in. How can we help from the other side? Number one is be able to draw your boundary. Express an understanding of one situation. Sometimes all it takes is to say, I recognize why you would be upset. Not because I'm arguing that, you shouldn't be upset with me. Is it my fault? No. It may not be your fault, but from the end of the recipient, it is important sometimes to just recognize that it is normal what they're experiencing, considering their situation. Negate yourself from the analysis for a while and just say, look, I understand why you would be upset. How can I help you? When you start from there, even their own emotional disposition will feel like it's misplaced. The anger that they felt will feel misplaced. But sometimes when we try to be too logical in an emotional state, it creates problems. Husbands, don't be overly logical when clearly your spouse is in an emotional state. In the emotional state, recognize and help them resolve the emotion, then bring in logic. Quick example, if you tell me you sang a song or you did a play and I hated the play and you asked me afterwards, very excited, what did you think about the play? If I become too logical and say, the play was very, very bad, objectively speaking, it might not sit well. But without telling a lie, I can say, look, I recognize how much work you put in there. I recognized how passionate about it you are. That passion was coming through. I can't be as logical as I want to be. Later, when the emotion settles down, then I can sit down and say, look, how, with that play, these elements were not very good. And their ability to get that feedback, even that negative as it is improved by the way we choose to respond to some of these things. May the good Lord bless us all, and I appreciate and are grateful for the opportunity to share. May God be with us.
What do we say again? How many want Dr. Banda to come to Chainama Church again and we discuss even more? Elder, you've seen the hands, just from the sample size here. Yes. Bible study on mental health. Yes, very, very important. Dr. Banda, we thank you for your ministry, and may God give you grace to go through the issues of life, but also to help you as you continue edifying the church and other people with regard to issues of mental health and Christianity. We've come to the end of the program, and I would like to invite Elder Kaputula to come through. We're supposed to have seasons of prayers, but we'll just have two prayers. One by the presenter, Dr. Banda, who will pray about our mental health status as a church, and then the elder will close. Shall we kneel down?
We are praying. Heavenly Father, it's been a humbling experience for me this day to be with your children, to share the knowledge that I have and the experiences that I've had, to help us all as we navigate the world and keep our minds. It is important for us to have good mental well-being, because it is through the mind that even your Holy Spirit speaks to us. So if we have poor mental health, damaged minds, our ability to discern the Spirit's biddings will be affected. I pray in a special way that as we navigate the spiritual and the physical regarding our mental health, your Spirit may be with us to give us wisdom to know how to combine the help available from the physical end and the physicians and nurses that work in the spaces and the spiritual help that comes from above. I pray, Lord, for this church, the different things that they are going through, the different homes that have different challenges that they are battling with, many of them presented to your throne in their family altars, in their personal altars. I pray, Lord, that if some of their solutions ahead within the work that we do. You will guide and direct them to the right people that will be able to help them, so that at the end of the day, they are able not only to recover from the issues that they are going through, but also to help others recover, and together we can journey on to the New Jerusalem. I pray that you will be with them as they continue in their camp. Continue to speak to their minds. I know the benefits of the rest they are receiving. Help them to understand the blessings that come with stealing away from their usual lives, for their mental health and for their physical health and for their spiritual health. Be with them even as they continue the rest of the camp is my prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.
Lesa wesu, tata wesu, kalenga wesu, kalinda wesu ngawekala kumulu kwa shila. Munshtaino ya chungulo kasuba. Tuatashisha paluselu eno kutemwa kwenu no kusakamana kuntumwa kwa tapa mtundu wa muntunse. Tuatotela palikalume wenu wa mwabomfya munshtaino ya chungulo kasuba. Okuleta isambilisho ilikankala kabili isambilisho ilishaiwa mina mkati ya kamio Yesu. Tuatotela kabili panstei mwapya kuliba ifo ya kwa tuingesa lanshanya na imwenga lesa wesu kabili ngechibusa. Tuatotela pawanshiko mwakwa tapakatika mulu neso mbili. Ukweba ati tuingalansha na imwe no ukweba ati amashu Yesu engomfu ika kuntansha mlola wenu. Moka chaka kusambira kwesu munshtaino achungulo kasuba. Lisambilisho likankala ili kumine ifyo amatonton kanyo Yesu yaba. Okuti ubumi bwesu ngachakuti amatonton kanyo tayali bwino ni ubumi bwesu bonse tawabe bwino mkati akabwikashi bwesu. Kabumba bamulile sonde. Apo mwebo mulile so watubumbile owaishiba nefyo kutontonkanya kwesu kulingiro kuba kabiri kwa pwililika pakweba twingaba abantu abampana n'omulu. Twalomba kuba kwenu kwa bweso kushayipipa kuti mwingatambalika palichila umuna umwa muli baifwe. Okusangulula n'okuposha amatontonkanyo Yesu. Mukati akachalo echi natukwata mafya ya kumine amatontonkanyo Yesu ngachila muntu. Natukwata mafya ya kumine amatontonkanyo Yesu ngendupwa. Natukwata mafya ya kumine amatontonkanyo Yesu ngechilonganino. Natukwata mafya ya kumine amatontonkanyo Yesu ngwa mpano bwesu kuli umono mnankwe. Tuapapata Yehova leso wa mweo mwali tuishiba bwino. Kabili ubuposho mukati akama tontonkanyo Yesu nefe yali afunganishiwa nesondeli. Kuti kuwafuma fe kuli imwe mweka epela noku ekulomba kwesu. Tuafueni pamulandu wa kweba ati mule tupekanishisha ukuisa ingila mkati akabufu mwenu buleisa. Ukuisa kwesu ukuisa longana kuntanisha mula wenu mkati akansa kwei. Lekeni kupokelele ipalo ili aibela. Kulichila umuna umuwa muli baifwe. Paleni amayanda Yesu. Paleni abana besu. Tupaleni bonse chapa mnoku tupekanisha ukuisa kwenu kwa chibili. Ilo tuwasambilila msango yuwa shayi wamina. Paleni msosu wa wenu uwa mwachibonfya mukati yaka isambilisho ili mchongulo kasuwa chino. Ukweba atiro tuwapalwa kupitila mukati yaka isambilisho ili na awine pongolole ni palo pali wene na balupwa bakwe bonse. Fwe bonse ukabila kwesu kwa kwa chilo mwala iso mkuu wa chibili no kusa senda abantu wa benu. Tukasangi abalinga no kusapia no fungwenu buleisa. Tuwalile ni kula tutungulula no kula tupala no kuwasuka mapepo Yesu nga fintuleka bilo kuwasuka mkuu. Ekulomba kwa Yesu mwishinila kwa Kristo mfumu Yesu pe. Amen.
Amen. Are the loud cry available? Okay, we can disperse with the chorister's choice.
Brother Anthony, you can come through. From what I've learned, love stands out. Amen. God is love with his little children. God is love. We would be like him. 'Tis love that makes us happy. 'Tis love that smooths the way. It helps us mind. It makes us kind to others every day.